Hello, everyone. Taking a minute or two to let you all hop on. Hey, everybody. It's Alexandria here, Alex. Hope y'all are hanging in there. I would ask how you're doing, but I think a lot of us, especially, I kind of posted something similar to that question in my Q&As earlier, and a lot of people are feeling very similar things. People, like you said, yeah, feel free to drop how you're feeling in the chat. A lot of people saying they're not okay. Hey, heartbroken. A lot of people are scared. And just want to hop on, and I want to talk with you all about a lot of different things. And about, where we move forward from here, what we've just experienced, what our thoughts on this are, and what's next for all of us ahead. I guess I'll start with a little bit of the lay of the land here. Linda Sarsour saying, we got this. That's right. We do. We have no choice. And I'll get to that in a minute. But very quickly here, lay of the land. As we know, Donald Trump won the presidency. Vice President Harris conceded the race today. She called President-elect Trump to concede the race personally and underscored the importance of a peaceful transition of power, and that she was committed to that. And also underscored the importance and the truth that we do not pledge to any individual or any office, but we pledge our oaths to the Constitution of the United States. Now, in terms of everything else, as we know, Donald Trump won the presidency. Republican Party has won the Senate. And the U.S. House of Representatives has still not been called. As of this morning, I believe there were over 50 races that were still outstanding. So neither party has officially declared or has been officially declared as having the House majority. For a lot of people who are asking functional questions about what can we do, a lot hinges on what happens in the House of Representatives and control of the U.S. House of Representatives. If Democrats control the House, that gives a slight ledge to resist and prevent some of the worst legislative proposals from going through. For example, in contrast, if Republicans win majority of the House, they have discussed passing a national abortion ban. And there would be, if they have the votes for it as a party legislatively, there would be very little we could do to stop it, since they would have the House majority, the Senate majority, and a President Trump that would potentially be willing to sign that into law. As I've discussed on the campaign trail, a national abortion ban would prevail over any state law. So you are not protected if you are in California or New York or a blue state that has abortion rights. A national abortion ban is a national abortion ban. It would ban abortion in the United States of America, regardless of your state law. So that is just one of many different types of legislative provisions that control of the House really has a lot of influence over. I believe right now that Democrats are looking to be competitive. We have a shot at getting control of the House of Representatives. which would block some of the most heinous legislative proposals that would have to pass through the House, Senate, and presidency. On this note, I actually think when we talk about what needs to be done and how we look ahead, and I don't want to bounce around too much, but one of the big things that I think is going to be very important for all of us, and again, I might be bouncing around because I am what is known, and I believe in a theory of politics known as inside-outside politics. That means that I believe we have people and elected officials on the inside that try to agitate, or rather try to organize and build power and help influence decisions on the inside of institutions, but that alone is not enough or sufficient to make change in this country. That we also need mass movement politics and robust people's movements, and that those people's movements are where the actual seats of power and influence in this country come from a mass organized and mobilized base of working people. And so on an outside perspective, there are a lot of things that we have to do ahead of us. One of those things, I believe, is something known as programs of political education that can go from the most basic to more complex. But we need to learn a lot. We need to build a base of knowledge among ourselves and people that we know. A lot of people may not know how laws are passed or how governance works, and that's okay, but it's very important that we start to learn. Sorry, I'm just keeping up with some of your comments as well. Now, what this means is that I think it's important, and I'm going to just give it to you all very straight. This is going to be a very, 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 very challenging, difficult time. We can use the next several months to prepare as best as we can. Trump would be inaugurated around January 20th or so. And we can use this time to prepare as best as we can for what is going to be a very challenging and very difficult time for millions of people in this country. A lot of people have asked me that, is Trump actually going to do the things that he said he's going to do? I think, listen, no one has a crystal ball, but I think that it is, and what we said on the campaign trail, when he says he's going to do something, believe him. I believe just today, his press secretary confirmed his commitment to mass deportations beginning, the day or day after of his presidency. Talking about RFK trying to remove fluoridated water from the United States, which, there are public health. I'm not here to get into debates with anybody or, start fires in the group chat or whatever. But, when you look at public health comprehensive studies of, cities and towns that have done that, the amount of kids that really suffer health outcomes and need to, receive, I believe, like antibiotic injections and all this other crazy stuff is through the roof. We're talking about vaccines that may be taken off the market entirely. And, even Mitch McConnell, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, still suffers from complications of, I believe, about a polio that he had when he was a child. This is real. And I'm not here to sugarcoat what we all are about to collectively experience. But I think that what we can do to prepare is build community. we do not have a choice. We don't have a choice. Our choice is to build. Our choice is to continue to fight. Our choice is to win. Our choice is to have each other. We are about to enter a political period that will have consequences for the rest of our lives. We cannot give up. We now find ourselves in a time in history that has precedent, and we find ourselves, I believe, in a time where there are, let's say, peers in history of mass movements of people that mobilize to protect one another in times of fascism and authoritarianism. And this is the era that we are poised to enter. Donald Trump has talked about turning the military on U.S. citizens that he deems his domestic political enemies. Authoritarians and people that he affiliates closely with and strongmen abroad in regimes like that, it is not uncommon to jail political dissidents or legislative opponents. This is the world that we very realistically may be entering. And the way that we do everything that we can to prevent this is by building a very strong social fabric and social infrastructure. Now, a lot of people have asked me, and I've posted some of the things before, how have we gotten here? How can we improve? A lot of people have also asked me about thoughts on the Democratic Party or certain communities that were lost or, what have you. And I will comment a bit on some of that. But the one thing that I want to open up and say is that first and foremost, here's my personal take. Anyone who woke up this morning, or rather I should say an urge this morning to wake up and point one main finger or articulate one primary reason as to why this happened, I think has lost the forest for the trees a little bit. There are a lot of different factors that have gone into this moment. I will get into some of them shortly. But to say that it's any one thing, it is an avalanche of different things. But we can get into some of it. I've gotten a lot of questions about the Democratic Party. I've got a lot of questions about women, about what this means, about Latinos, about this group or that group. And we can try to dig into some of these things now. But I think what's most important is for us to remain pretty high-minded about a lot of this. In that, I mean, what is going to be most important in this time is rejecting sectarianism and understanding that we have to be united as a people. Our main project is to unite the working class in this country against a fascist agenda, period. We have had an enormous setback in this election because the fascist won a lot of working class support, which has happened before in history, and we can talk about that. But, I think what is important is that we have to be able to hold that analysis and have these discussions without turning on each other. And if I can take off my more broad commentary hat on and put on a more progressive or whatever one may want to call that, left or progressive or working class or whatever it is, we have to be able to construct a culture that is productive, that is focused on growing, that is not sectarianism, and does not tear one another apart over the narcissism of small differences. We will remain marginal and small and incapable of confronting the challenges ahead of us if we cannot learn to hold difference and understand and be able to distinguish an ally from an opponent. And that has been a challenge up to this point. And we will not survive if we cannot grow past that. Now, I think that when it comes to the Democratic Party, one of the big questions that we've seen is like, what has happened with the Democratic Party and the working class? And I think that it's, to me, from my vantage point, I think I see a lot of what's happened. I was a waitress right up until I got elected to Congress. This was not a cute summer job that I had as a teenager, and then I did some jobs, and then I got elected to Congress years later. I went from wiping down a bar and walking behind it to walking into the halls of Congress. And the reason I did that and the reason I ran was not because I was running against a Republican. It's because I ran against a Democrat that I did not believe centered families or communities like mine, or saw the pain of people like me. And a lot of what I saw at that time was a Democrat that only ran against Trump and did not support a vision that, with clarity, that spoke to my material reality. And I got to a point as a waitress where I felt like if my member of Congress wouldn't support a $15 minimum wage and say it with their full chest with clarity like that, then I would. And again, I'm not speaking for every single district or every single person. I'm recounting the story of what happened in my life. I felt like if my representative from a deep blue seat could not fight for my right to have health care unequivocally, then I would fight for my right to have health care and for my community's right to have health care guaranteed unequivocally. I, at the time, was represented by, or felt like our representation took a lot of corporate money, a lot of lobbyist money, and answered more to the people and the class that they raised money from than the people who voted for them. And I ran for office to change that. Now, I'm not here to, I think there's two important things to communicate here. A party loses and another party wins. And I think it's important to also state here that Kamala Harris was given an assignment that no other person in American history was given, to construct a presidential campaign in 90 to 100 days with absolutely no expectation or anticipation that she would be called to that assignment and have to deliver the country from an enormous fascist threat that had already been campaigning and priming the pump for essentially 8 years. So any observations that I raise I believe have to do with longer term trends around our party and what we can do to improve and get back to our roots as champions of the working class. And this is not, none of this is meant to be constructed at her. A lot of times I think people try to erase one criticism for another. Oh, it wasn't this, it wasn't that. But the fact of the matter is, you know, this race may not have been decided by any one individual factor, but misogyny is very, very real in this country. As another widely known woman of color in office, you know, I knew that sexism and racism were real, but it was not until I got subjected to a national stage that I actually was shocked at how bad it is. You know, you grow up with it, but there is something about being on the receiving line or just nationally exposed to millions of eyeballs at once that you feel that fire hose and you actually understand how deeply ingrained it is. And it is not partisan. It transcends politics. And that's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow, that misogyny can exist in left spaces, in right spaces, in center spaces. It's not a moral thing. It is how we are raised in cultures that program this in us. And it's very real and it's very, very deep. And when we look at races within margins, all of these things add up. They're not replacements or competing explanations with one another. If Kamala Harris was Tom Harris, we may have a different result today. I don't know. And so it is impossible to try to engage again in a sectarianism of explanation. These are all factors that I think is important for us to keep in mind at once. But again, I think that when it comes to Democrats losing the working class, I find, and I take issue sometimes with people saying, oh, the quote unquote left is the reason why this is happening, or like the quote unquote wokeism is why this is happening. I actually think it's the fact that people can't feed their kids, that Medicaid doesn't pay enough, that their Social Security check doesn't pay their rent, that housing is skyrocketing, that groceries are insane, and that structurally a party that relies on the financial backing, and again, this is an area where there's disagreement within my party. I'm not here to start a war about it. I've been very clear about what my assessment has been since the time I entered office. To me, a party that relies on big money, and this is not just Democrats, our entire system relies on big money. And before people say that it's only Democrats that rely on this, just understand that Donald Trump personally thanked Elon Musk, a billionaire, for delivering him the presidency. Donald Trump works for Elon Musk. He works for Jeff Bezos. He works for the oil execs. That's what he does, okay? Our entire system is consumed by big money, by billionaires, by lobbyists. Where it is complicated for Democrats is that we are supposed to champion the working class. And when you have a system financed by big money, who exerts a lot of interest to get you to not check the power of concentrated wealth, then you can't deliver on those promises. When you have billionaires, for example, who are cutting very big checks on one hand, and then with the other hand, publicly threatening the current federal trade commission chair, and essentially saying she's got to go, that does not allow us that puts us in a bind, no? Like structurally, that is a bind. It's a fundamental misalignment of mission and what powers us. And I wish I could say that this is just an easy problem to solve and just don't take it. And I think and I don't take it, but I think one of the reasons that this continues to be an issue is because I think a lot of people, especially in tough seats, look down the barrel of that, and it's you either compromise and get that big money to either stay out of the race or do whatever, or that big money goes to the Republican. I don't know. But at the end of the day, the ultimate problem is our ability to clearly and forthrightly advocate for an agenda that clearly champions the working class. To me, that's things like $15 minimum wage, Medicare for all, or at the very least, lowering the age of Medicare until it hits zero. But I mean, whatever those things may be, it also makes it hard. It applies a lot of pressure that I think is restrictive in allowing Democrats with their full chest to actually explain to people who is raising these prices. And so instead of saying things like, by the way, Kroger or, CVS or Rite Aid or ExxonMobil are price gouging you, and these companies, these corporations, or these billionaires are the ones that are screwing you over and jacking up your prices within an inch of your life, and we need to tackle their power. Instead, we're combating inflation. And this is a passive voice perspective that doesn't help people understand why is this happening and who is it doing it and who is doing it and how do we solve the problem. And that doesn't mean that there aren't things that the party is doing to try to tackle those things. President Biden passed the Inflation Reduction Act. Inflation went down. He also did a lot of things. He named that FTC chair, Lina Khan, that is working on tackling these huge corporate monopolies. He has done these things. But we all need to amplify and publicly educate and talk about why more needs to be done as a chorus. And so that is like, these are some of the structural contradictions, in my view, that make it challenging for us to speak in clear terms. Because when it's actually time to do the policy work, it is a very wide coalition of Democrats. And they'll say, well, we don't want to say 15, or let's not say Medicare for all, and so you get like all these different kinds of messages. Meanwhile, on the other hand, you get Donald Trump that says just like no tax on tips or no tax on Social Security. And it doesn't matter that he's lying. He's saying the thing clearly, and it then puts you on a back foot because people don't really understand, or it becomes this mealy-mouthed explanation of, well, you need the House to do that, and the Republican Party platform doesn't really have that. They won't have the votes to do it, so he's just saying it because he knows it's not going to work. He's saying it. And so I think that, these are huge things to have to contend with. And having a concise platform that actually materially and powerfully articulates the change that people can expect, that is not in a generalized way of prices are going to go down or inflation is going to be tackled, but moreover, we will raise the minimum wage. And again, Vice President Harris did that. She did that. And she ran a campaign and she was tasked with an assignment that was nearly impossible. And she made it possible. This race was so close. Many people also raising, and I think rightfully so, the issue of Gaza. And I think that when we talk about this issue, it's not just, a lot of hay was made about vote margins and all of this. And let's be very clear here. The margin of third-party voters in this election was not the margin of difference between Democratic votes and Republican votes. Now, there's a lot of data to dig into there and all of that stuff, but I actually think a lot of people in the movement understood the stakes and the assignment. And you may have had a very small degree of third-party voters, but ultimately, I do think that the majority of people understood the difference between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump and the stakes of that. And it may not have felt good, and people may not have enjoyed it or felt supportive of the platform, but they understood the stakes. And so I don't believe in scapegoating this. However, I also think it is important to note that the landscape of Gaza and the horrors of what was happening made organizing very difficult, needless to say. I think that for some of the most prolific organizers in this country are activists and activist communities, and having to contend with what most, I would argue, almost most of a strong activist organizing, mobilizing base, and many who lead that base consider a genocide. I don't think whether that is again, the horrors of everything that's going on. And again, I'm not even trying to open an argument here, but the horrors and the pain and all of it from October 7th through today, through the hostages, all of it, the lack of resolution, the lack of conclusion, the fact that Netanyahu dragged this out and just lapped the Biden administration at every turn, very much dampened and complicated and added a tremendous amount of static to organizing momentum and capacity throughout the entire year. Whether people like that or not, it is, in my view, an important part of the landscape of what was going on. And people can take it, people can leave it. I don't think it's something that we can ignore. There's other issues too. Our media, and here's the one that I think is the most important. At the end of the day, and I alluded to this earlier, our entire political apparatus has been captured by a billionaire class. It's been captured by a corporate class and a billionaire class. Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, and that billionaire class went fully mask off, and the plutocracy in this country went fully mask off this cycle. Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. He pressured the Post into not making an endorsement, a presidential endorsement, this year. It doesn't matter if that is influential or not in how a person votes or what have you. What matters is that we can now dispense ourselves of the myth that a handful of people in this country are deeply and profoundly manipulating our democracy to their own self-interest. I'm not impugning the incredibly hardworking journalists at the Washington Post, but it is simply to name who owns it and the limitations that exist in institutions that are owned by billionaires. Elon Musk took over Twitter, which was a large space of conversation and organizing. And he manipulated the algorithms to meet his political ends. You have a billionaire funded, and the amount of money that he poured in, he didn't just buy X, he poured in just ungodly sums of money in dark money in our elections. You have an entire podcast network that is financed by a similar billionaire and dark money class. And these are structural issues. When we talk about why our country is so polarized, a lot of it has to do with the media we consume and who owns and influences the media that we consume. So where do we go from here? Well, first and foremost, I can tell you that if you are a constituent of mine in New York's 14th Congressional District, in parts of the Bronx and Queens, first and foremost, that's my first responsibility. That is the specific population of people who have elected me and whose job I have to steward and respond to first. But I feel that responsibility for everybody. But if you are a constituent of mine, first and foremost, I am committed to doing everything in my power to protect you. That power will be limited in a Trump administration. Project 2025 is real. It's real. It's not a campaign joke. It's not an attack. The Heritage Foundation is the conservative foundation, the institution and organization that orchestrates Republican governance. They would not put millions of dollars into preparing this plan and it being co-authored by many people in the Trump administration if they were not fully prepared to implement it. This is going to be a very scary time. And again, I cannot emphasize how important it is that we, as an aligned people, be very cautious about attacking one another and about attacking one another. And to me, one of the big organizing lessons that I feel is that when it comes to who you choose to organize with, I think it's really important to understand that, maybe it's not just about fully aligning with someone just because of what they're organizing for. It's really important to pay attention to how they are organizing. And if someone is using a righteous cause as a cover for cruel methods and dehumanizing others, personally, that is not someone that I trust to organize with, because our job is to grow. And the reason we are in this position is because we do not have a raw majority of people who are ideologically aligned. And in instances where you do not have an outright majority, we must develop coalitions. And the name of the game in coalitions is that we have to be able to align with people that we are not fully in agreement with in the name of a larger cause. That goes for any movement, and it goes for any cause. And it's really, really, really important because it can undermine that kind of cruelty or side sniping or whatever can undermine genuine momentum. And I think it's important to also understand that these folks, there's a history in this country of powerful people bankrolling disruptors in people's movements. And instead of diminishing what a person is fighting for, I think it's just important that we build together alongside people who are centering humanity in how they are organizing, in addition to what they're organizing for. In terms of communities and turnout for them, first and foremost, there's a couple different realities for us to contend with at the same time. I do think it's important to recognize that the Black electorate, first of all, Black voters, I believe, remain one of the most prescient voting bloc in the United States, point blank, period. And we see that bear out in our numbers. That being said, very often there's a lot of ink spilled before and after elections about Black men, Latinos, people of color, etc. And we can dig into the fine points of where places eroded support and not, but we should be very clear that people of color voted for Kamala Harris in majorities. There's always this thing after a cycle, especially if there's any diminishment, to blame communities that overwhelmingly and majority vote for Democrats. When that vote diminishes slightly, instead of us really taking a look at what is happening with for example, white electorate that only votes 17% for the Democrat. And it is, it's really interesting to me because when it's time to govern, those communities get so centered and their concerns get so centered, and it's like nothing we do sometimes can win these electorates over. And I'm not here to dismiss it, but we need to really dig into some of those reasons. And we should not use communities that are part of the Democratic coalition as scapegoats for other communities that have not been voting with the Democratic coalition. We need to separate these things. I'm not saying that we're going to gloss over what has happened here, but I think a big part of what has happened here is the erosion of a working class agenda and articulating a working class agenda. And when you add that in the context of racism in this country, and when you add that in the context of misogyny in this country, you get a perfect storm of what I think we witnessed last night. It's not, we just, it's, a lot of this comes down to, again, this enormous task that we have of political education, of race and class consciousness, and people understanding that these billionaires are not looking out for us. They are grinding us to a pulp and they are eating us for breakfast. They are burning our planet. And I just want you all to know that in terms of what guided and has guided me over the last year, is that every single decision I made and every effort that I made, whether people criticize it or not or what have you, was just centered on trying to prevent this outcome. It was my single biggest priority was preventing a Donald Trump presidency. It informed my decisions, my actions, and we are where we are today. And we have a lot of work to do. I did not want to be in a place where on November 6th, we were preparing to resist a fascist regime. I wanted to be fighting the corporate establishment of the Democratic Party instead. But we're not in that place. We're in this place. And it is going to take a huge level of effort and solidarity. We are going to be looking towards our brothers and sisters in the labor movement, in the human and civil rights movement, And we are going to have to resist. It's this really interesting thing. Resist this confluence of, like, first of all, I've never ascribed to this idea, and this is, I know this is going to upset people, but genuinely, when I came to politics, it was not about trying to articulate to the world about what being a quote unquote leftist is. I always considered myself as running from the bottom. That this is not about left and right, but that this is about top and bottom, and that we have to run from the bottom up. And some may say, well, left is bottom, and depending on your worldview, yes, but I think there's this very interesting confluence that we see from, I think, more conservative spaces, that the alienation of the working class has to do with people of different identities standing together. And to me, the alienation of, and like this idea of like wokeism, but to me, the alienation, the Democratic Party's alienation of the working class has to do with the fact that we haven't been able to deliver on a $15 minimum wage, etc., for many different reasons. And we have to put those demands front and center in order to do that. And we shouldn't be afraid to fight for what we believe in. And we shouldn't be afraid to fight, period. But I'm not here to say that we've got all of the answers. A lot of things that people are scared about, a national abortion ban, that would require House control, but dismantling the Department of Education, all of these things. Trump is an autocrat, and we are in a much worse position now than we were when he was last president, because he is much more prepared, and he is much more competent, and he knows what mistakes he made last time. And so we are poised to enter a much darker, a much scarier time whose consequences we will be living with for the rest of our lives. Even just from a climate perspective. I wish I could say that we could undo all of the damage that we are about to, or we are poised to endure, but there's some things we will not recover from. We will not recover from blowing past 1.5 degrees centigrade or 2 degrees centigrade of warming. And we will live with the consequences of that for the rest of our lives. And I'm sorry to say that, but it is true. There are other things that we can fight for, and we will have to fight for. But I just want you all to know that as long as I'm here, I will be fighting alongside with you. And this just happened yesterday. I don't have marching orders for you right now. My marching orders would basically be to find your safe network of people, to find your pod, to find your community. We have to do a lot of community building. And by that, I don't just mean organizing politically. I mean active community building. We are in a position where the isolation of a capitalist system, the isolation produced by COVID, just where we are as a society, people working 4 jobs, 3-4 jobs to make ends meet. We do not have community. And believe it or not, community, whether it's your church or mosque or temple, whether it's a knitting group, whether it's, your dinner circle, building that community is actually far more transformative and far more important than you may realize. And people may dismiss it, and people may think that it's silly or frivolous. It is not. I guarantee you it is not. And we are in a time where people finding their friends and finding their circle is a challenge. If you don't have your group that is close to you, you are probably in a similar boat as so many Americans right now. It's a big reason why we're here as a country in this place. And so we can commit ourselves to making the smallest communities as we can around ourselves. If you don't know your neighbor, it's time to know your neighbor. Or if you have a coworker that you think you're cool with or whatever, it's time to get to know that person. And it's time to get to know the people that we will be relying on to protect and to protect each other. It seems frivolous, but I guarantee you it's not. And creating community around you is one of the strongest, most powerful, and also one of the most radical things you can do in an environment like this. So for those who are small blue dots in big red areas, I want you to know that we're thinking of you, and we can start to generate some of that community. And sometimes even just being in community with, or small moments of humanity with people who are not like-minded with you, are sometimes a very odd little things that can help them change their mind. I'm not saying that we're here to do all of that work, but we have a long road ahead of us. And just want to say I love you all. And this is going to be very hard. And we're going to have to get through it together. But we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice. We have no choice but to live and be in the times that we have been called to live in, and to make it better one day at a time, one choice at a time. Never, ever, ever think that any choice or any act of yours is too small. It isn't. And regimes and autocracies are taken down by millions of drops of small actions that would otherwise be invisible by masses of people. So I look forward to doing this work with you all. And this is the assignment that we have ahead of us. We'll probably be doing a couple more of these ahead. Bye, y'all.